In the shadow of Rome's towering temples and gleaming marble, an empire thrived on blood, conquest, and the chains of the enslaved. It was the 1st century BCE, a time when the Roman Republic stood as an unshakable colossus. Its legions feared across continents, its senators revered as gods among men, its power absolute. This was a world built on the backs of millions, slaves who tilled fields, carved stone, and died in arenas, their lives fueled for Rome's endless yet, beneath this grandeur simmered a darkness, the cries of the oppressed, the rattle of shackles, the silent rage of those who toiled and bled for Rome's glory. From this dust and despair, one man rose to challenge it all. His name was Spartacus, a warrior, a slave, a gladiator, and in time a legend who dared to defy the might of Rome itself. This is the story of a rebellion that shook an empire to its core, a tale of courage, betrayal, and a fight for freedom that still echoes through the ages, whispering to us across millennia about the cost of liberty and the power of defiance. Spartacus entered the world around 111 BCE in Thrace, a rugged frontier land on the edges of Rome's dominion, what we now call parts of Bulgaria, Greece, and Turkey. History leaves his early years shrouded in mystery, but voices from the past, like the historian Plutarch, suggest he was a warrior of note, a man of strength and spirit. Some believe he served as an auxiliary soldier in Rome's own armies, fighting alongside the legions against distant foes, perhaps even his own people. Thrace was a land of fierce pride, its tribes wielding spears and shields with a skill born of survival, their hearts as untamed as the jagged mountains they called home. But Rome's hunger for power was a beast that devoured all in its path. Whether Spartacus was betrayed by allies, deserted his post, or fell in battle, his fate turned grim. Captured, stripped of his freedom, he was bound in chains and sold into slavery, destined for the gladiator pits of Capua, a crucible that would test his soul and ignite his legend. Capua, a bustling hub south of Rome, was a city of trade and spectacle, home to one of the Republic's most infamous ludi schools, where men were forged into living weapons for the arena's blood-soaked stage. Here, Spartacus was no longer a warrior or a man. He was a commodity, a beast trained to kill or be killed for the delight of Rome's cheering masses. Picture the scene. The sun beats down mercilessly. Dust swirls in choking clouds. The air reeks of sweat and fear. The clatter of chains mixes with the crack of whips as men, Gauls with braided hair, towering Germans, Thracians like Spartacus, spar with wooden blades, their bodies honed for slaughter, their worth brothers in suffering, their worth measured in the blood they spilled on the sand. But Spartacus stood apart. Beneath his weathered skin and battle scars burned a fire Rome couldn't extinguish. A quiet resolve, a refusal to accept his chain. He watched his captors, he studied his comrades, and in 73 BCE he seized his moment. It began with a whisper in the dark, a desperate, audacious plan born of courage and fury. Spartacus rallied about 70 gladiators, men hardened by the arena's brutal lessons, and turned the tools of their captivity into instruments of revolt. Kitchen knives, sharpened spits, stolen swords, whatever they could snatch from the barracks became their arsenal. In a sudden, ferocious surge they struck. Guards fell under a hail of blows, their shouts drowned by the rebels' cries. Chains snapped, doors splintered, and the gladiators burst into the cool night air, tasting freedom for the first time in years. But freedom, in the heart of Rome's domain, was a fragile, perilous thing. Pursued by vengeful overseers, they fled to the shadowed slopes of Mount Vesuvius, a towering volcano that loomed over the Italian countryside. There, amid its crags and caves, they built their first stronghold, a spark that would soon blaze into a rebellion. Word of their daring escape spread like wildfire across the fields and hills of Italy. Slaves abandoned their masters' villas in the dead of night, leaving plows and shackles behind. Shepherds traded staffs for spears, laborers dropped their tools, and even women and children, those crushed by Rome's iron heel, joined the swelling tide. Within months, Spartacus's band of 70 grew into a sprawling army of over 70,000 souls. This was no chaotic mob. It was a movement, a desperate chorus of voices united by a single burning dream: liberty. Spartacus, with his Thracian warriors' cunning and perhaps lessons from his time in Roman ranks, molded them into a force to be reckoned with. Farmers learned to wield blades, shepherds to set ambushes. He taught them guerrilla warfare, swift, shadowy strikes, clever traps, maneuvers that turned Rome's lumbering legions into prey. Under his command, they became a storm sweeping through the south, a tempest Rome had never foreseen. Rome's response was as arrogant as it was predictable. The Senate, cloistered in their marble halls, dismissed the uprising as a petty nuisance, bandits to be swatted away. They sent Gaius Claudius Glaber, a prior, with a modest force to crush the rebels and restore order. But Spartacus was no common outlaw. From Vesuvius's heights he watched and waited. In a stroke of genius, his men crafted ropes from wild vines, descending the cliffs in the dead of night to strike Glaber's camp like phantoms. Swords flashed in the moonlight, tents burned, and the Romans, caught in their overconfidence, were slaughtered. It was a stunning victory, the first of many. Praetors fell one by one, their legions shattered by Spartacus's relentless assaults. For 2 years he roamed southern Italy, a specter of defiance, his name a whispered hope among the enslaved and a curse in Rome's gilded corridors. By 72 BCE, the Senate could no longer turn a blind eye. Their pride bruised, their authority mocked, they faced a crisis unlike any before. Spartacus wasn't just winning battles, he was unraveling Rome's myth of invincibility. In their desperation, they turned to Marcus Licinius Crassus, Rome's wealthiest man, a shrewd politician and a general with a heart as cold as iron. Crassus saw Spartacus as both a peril and a prize, an enemy to crush and a stepping stone to greater power. He raised 6 legions, some 50,000 soldiers, armed and disciplined, vowing to end the rebellion and etch his name in Rome's annals. For Spartacus, the horizon darkened. His dream was to lead his people north, across the towering Alps, to lands beyond Rome's reach. Freedom at last. But his army, now a sprawling mass of desperate followers, wavered. Some clung to hopes of a new life in Italy, others thirsted for vengeance. That division would prove their undoing. In 71 BCE, the end arrived at the Silarus River in southern Italy. Crassus, relentless and calculating, cornered Spartacus's forces, blocking every path to escape. Outnumbered, exhausted, and betrayed by pirates who'd promised ships to ferry them away, Spartacus faced a stark choice: surrender to the chains he'd broken, or fight to his last breath. He chose the warrior's way. The battle erupted in a maelstrom of chaos, steel clashing against steel, screams tearing through the dawn, the earth slick with blood. Spartacus, legends tell, fought like a man possessed, a titan wreathed in fury, cutting a path through Roman ranks toward Crassus himself. He sought the head of the man who doomed his dream, a final act of defiance. But Rome's numbers were a tide too vast to stem. Somewhere in that crimson flood, Spartacus fell, his body lost to the carnage, swallowed by the battlefield's embrace. 6,000 survivors were seized. Crassus, ever the master of spectacle, ordered them crucified along the Appian Way, the road stretching from Capua to Rome. For miles, crosses rose like grim sentinels, their silhouettes a haunting testament to Rome's merciless retribution. Spartacus was gone, his rebellion crushed beneath Rome's iron fist, yet his story didn't end on that bloodied riverbank. Rome could kill the man, but they couldn't slay the idea he'd ignited. A spark of resistance that flickered in the hearts of the downtrodden across centuries. In the slave revolts of Haiti, in the cries of Europe's oppressed, his name endured, a symbol of the unyielding will to be free. Was he a hero, a liberator who dared to dream of a world unshackled, or a doomed dreamer, a reckless spark that burned too bright? Historians wrestle with his legacy. Plutarch called him a man of courage and wisdom, while others branded him an outlaw. But one truth stands unshaken. Spartacus faced the greatest empire of his age and made it tremble, a lone voice that roared against the silence of oppression. Spartacus didn't win his war. He didn't topple Rome's marble thrones or free every soul in chains. But he fought, he stood, and in that stand he carved his name into the stone of history, not with wealth or titles, but with the raw, unbreakable spirit of a man who refused to kneel. What drives a man to defy an empire, to trade certain death for a fleeting chance at freedom? Perhaps it's the same fire that stirs in us all, a longing to be masters of our own fate. Spartacus may have perished on the Silarus River, his body lost to time, but his legacy? That burns eternal, a torch held high against the dark, a reminder that even in defeat, the human spirit can shine brighter than any empire's crown.